just want to welcome all of you tonight and let you know that first off, when I went through, I was trying to pull pictures and trying to align those with cultivars and varieties. I'm like, oh my Lord, I'll have these people here till next Monday night. So it was kind of a pick and choose, but I want you to know that all of these align with publications that you are going to receive in the email tonight. So University of Tennessee, our Sustainable Landscapes group, we put together brand new publications on annuals, biennials, perennials, bulbs, and then seed grown flowers for your garden. So all those are fairly new, just in the last 6 months. 2 of those just were released last week. So you're going to see a lot of plants mentioned here in the slideshow tonight. So I kind of stress that this is just pictures, and I'm going to, hit on a few highlights in regards to each one of these, but just know as we move through that there's going to be probably a multitude of colors for many of these species. They're going to have different site conditions and requirements, but all of that information can be found in those publications. So as you're reviewing all those, just kind of use this as a guide. If nothing else, you can see maybe a pop of color or kind of see what the foliage looks like, see if it grows in the shade, maybe some contrast for your landscape. So hopefully this is going to give you some ideas. So we'll start out tonight just with annuals. These are some of those plants that we buy in those 6-packs, even at the box stores, local nursery centers, to kind of fill in the gaps and the holes as we move through from spring until late fall. I think it was 2 weeks ago, maybe, I mentioned the wild ageratum and said to be sure to not confuse it with the annual ageratum. Well, this is the annual ageratum, so it's going to be a little bit different in its posture because it's a little bit more of a low grower, but it's still going to have that bright, vivid blue, and it's an excellent cut flower, and then it's also going to be a great pollinator. This one here is going to be Angelonia. And I guess another thing to mention here too with the names. On each one of these slides, you're going to have the Latin name down there in the right corner. And then some of the common names, trade names, Darby and I have talked about this. What we might call one plant, we call it something different in another part of the state or in another state altogether. So I put some of those more common names in the notes so you can kind of refer back to that as well. But I guess this one here is just a really pretty contrast plant. It even makes a pretty border plant. Those summer blooms start to taper off as we move through the hot part of summer, but then they'll kind of rebound back as those temperatures start cooling down. So you get a little bit of pop in the early spring, and then again a little bit later in the fall. This one's one that we probably all recognize. This is going to be the tropical milkweed. It is going to be a pollinator for us, and it is a host plant for the monarch butterfly. Now you're going to notice there's lots of different species, and I put the specific one here if you like that color combo, but there's going to be a lot of different colors, and even some of the foliage is going to vary a little bit differently too. This is one that you're going to want to have in full sun. This is going to be one of the vinca. Periwinkle sometimes is what you'll hear it referred to. It's going to be a sun lover. A lot of folks think it looks a lot like our impatiens, and the bloom kind of does. It is kind of similar to the impatiens, but these are going to be full sun. They're going to thrive in areas of poor soil. So if you've got a hole somewhere, you can pop those in there. They like droughty conditions. And then there are going to be some more upright, kind of like you see here, but there's also going to be some trailing cultivars as well. The upright can get as tall as 6 to 8 inches tall. This is one that I think is really cool. Sometimes you'll hear it called garden wheat. There's going to be lots of different colors of these, but this is going to be one of the celosia cultivars, one of the species. So again, any kind of color you can imagine, you're going to find this, from the deep dark reds to an orangey red or rust color. Even the golden colors, lighter pinks than what you see here. So some are even going to have a more natural look. So if you're into that natural landscape, some of the tan, beige color would fit in nicely into some of those borders. And again, excellent pollinator. This is one that we refer to as the spider plant oftentimes. Sometimes they require a little staking. This is called the Cleone. one or a couple of these species are going to be sterile, but some of these are going to reseed pretty profusely. So when you go to investigating the cleomes, just kind of take note of that, whatever cultivar that you're getting. So this is going to be another one that is going to grow quite well in poor soil conditions. And like I say, sometimes you may need to stake these. It just kind of depends on the cultivar. This one here is really interesting, the Kufia. Hummingbirds love this plant, all pollinators. You can probably tell just by looking at the picture there, it would draw in the hummingbirds. There's places in West Tennessee that this could actually be winter hardy. So not here in East Tennessee. It's one of those that will is also going to be tropical in nature. So this is one that you're going to see a little bit later into the summers. We talk about the tropical oasis gardens. Once you get this plant established, though, it's very drought resistant. The bright burst of hot pink here, this is what we actually refer to as pinks. It's a dianthus species. It's going to have a really heavy bloom here in the next month or so when it peaks, but then it's just going to be really sporadic throughout the summer months. So we will actually get calls about that because it'll be so prolific early on and then it just kind of tapers off. This is a really nice one for rock gardens or even in your shade, partial shade areas. There's going to be lots of different species of the euphorbia, but a pretty cool plant that's grown in popularity in the last little bit. Probably the reason for that is because if you have deer, y'all, this is one that's going to be deer resistant. So you might want to jot that one down. You know what a poinsettia, when you break the stem open and it's got that milky sap, some people are irritated by that. This is the same type milky substance in this plant too. So if you have if you're prone to some of those skin irritations, this could be one that would bother you, kind of like rue, poinsettia, something like that. This one here is one we call Blue Days. It's going to be very heat and sun tolerant, and you can see that really pretty blue color, and then it's also going to have that trailing habit. If it gets cloudy, it's going to close. Those flowers are going to close, so it adds a little bit of interest in that regard. Here's one that we often refer to as the globe amaranth or gomphrena. You can see there it's going to make an excellent pollinator. If you make dried flower arrangements, it's really handy to grow this. You can grow it along borders, pop it in lots of different areas, and it's going to dry really pretty, or you can also use it as a cut flower. This is one that we refer to as the polka dot plant, Hypoestus, many different species of this one as well. I've never really seen this grown in ground. I usually see this more of a backdrop in big old container pots, used as a backdrop, kind of sets some of those other like sweet potato vines and things like that off a little bit better. And of course we have impatiens, and like I said earlier, most of your impatiens are going to be more suited to shade, but we do have some hybrid species like you see here, Bounce or Big Bounce, and then the Sun Patient series. All of those are actually going to be resistant to downy mildew, which has become a really huge and progressing problem with our impatiens in the last several years. And they're going to grow well in the sun, and they're going to be excellent performers. So you can see here, that's a couple of plants in each row, and it's really nice because those fill in really, really nicely. And again, make sure, you know, as far as the cultivar, that if you're in a shady area, you want to make sure that you're purchasing those suited for shade versus the sun patients like these. These, of course, are going to be lantana. They're going to come in different colors. They're going to have that trailing habit. Oftentimes, we'll kick these into our woody ornamentals because they do have that woody stem. And we do have some cold-specific varieties, so make sure you check in to that. And those are going to be listed in that sheet as well. The lobelia, you've heard me talk about these in other classes. Some people actually use these as a cover crop, but it's a really pretty blue-shaped flower. I'm not sure what you would call that shape, but this is one that's going to perform quite nicely in Northeast Tennessee and some of those higher elevations and some of those cooler areas, because it does prefer a little bit milder site location. It is one that you're going to find often used in container plantings as well, because it's a really nice filler plant. This one here is going to be the Melanospodium. Really pretty little yellow dainty flower. Lots of people like this because it reseeds so vigorously. So a lot of these, like I say, we're still in annual plants, but a lot of these will reseed and come back pretty prolifically, and a great pollinator plant as well. Actually, I think most of these in here are going to be great pollinators. This one here is Nicotiana, not the native species, but this is the little shorter plant with a really pretty Nicotiana bloom that you see there. There's going to be many different colors that you can purchase those in: red, pinks, purples, and even a lime green color, a chartreuse color. They too are going to prefer a little bit cooler temperature, so putting those in the shade, they'll actually perform well. Just watch out for the mildews, downy and powdery mildew. And then we have many species of the Rudbeckia. Black-eyed Susans, brown-eyed Susans. You're going to hear lots of different names for these, but there's many different cultivars. But all of these are going to perform very nicely in the landscape because they're drought tolerant. They're going to reseed very easily. You can probably see from that really dense seed head, and they make excellent cut flowers. Same with the Rudbeckia. We have many different species of salvia, so many. And oftentimes you can use these as borders and intermingle those with different salvia species. They'll attract hummingbirds. I really like this one. Y'all have heard me say that before, mixing this sage with the pineapple sage. The foliage is different. The blooms are a little bit different. This is more in a velvet texture, and the pineapple has more of that red prostrate bloom, but they intermingle really nicely together. And you get that bloom way up into September, which is really nice. This one here is the Scaviola. So these are going to be a trailing plant. They're going to come in a multitude of colors. The big drawback maybe to this one is that it's got to have really well drained soil, but it's going to require a little bit more water as well. So it's when you're going to have to find the balance on the watering issue. It does love heat and sunshine though, and it will tolerate drought once you get it established. It's just going to be finicky up front, so be aware of that. Many different species of tagetes or the marigolds, and know that the darker and the more fragrant they are, the more they're going to serve as a companion plant in the garden to repel pests. But there's many different colors, many species here as well. We've got the little pom-pom varieties all the way up to the tall African marigolds as well. They are going to be heat lovers, sun lovers. A lot of people don't like these for cut flowers. Some people will poke those in, but a lot of people don't like them just because of the fragrance. But these are going to be really easy to grow from seed too, y'all. Torrenia, this is one that's going to prefer a dappled shade area in your garden. It performs really nicely in those rocky areas, and then it's going to reseed itself pretty vigorously too. So pretty interesting little bloom on this guy here. Many species of verbena. This is one of the hybrid crosses. Again, excellent pollinator, but they are going to want that well-drained soil. And of course, we cannot mention annuals without talking about the ever-popular zinnia. This is one I really like, and I can't remember that species, and I didn't put it in your note, but I'll have to do that before I send it to y'all. But you can have a myriad of colors, a multitude of shapes. They grow so easily from seed. Just beautiful additions to any of your garden beds or landscape beds. And you know, they do have species that are going to be powdery mildew resistant. So if you're growing these in your garden and you have like a tight enclosed area and you're wanting to grow those pretty close, look for those mildew resistant cultivars. All right, so as far as biennials, and some of these you're probably already figuring out, they can kind of intermingle, especially as we move through tonight, so they can hit on multiple topic areas. But the biennials, of course, is going to take 2 years to do its thing. The first year will usually put off the foliage. The second year is when you see the bloom. So this is going to be what we refer to as the Dusty Miller. A lot of folks like this as an edging plant and to mix it in with bright colored cultivars. It makes a great moonlight garden plant. We're going to talk about some of those later in the summer. but it is very showy with that white foliage. That's one reason it kind of is a standout. And this one, the Dusty Miller, will also still look pretty fresh and nice through the winter months as well. So this is another dianthus, and you notice we talked about one of those earlier in annuals, but we do have some species. The barbatus here that we see is actually going to be a biennial, so you're going to have a lot of dense foliage again that first year. Remember, the thing with the pinks or the dianthus is that they're going to bloom pretty prolifically and then taper off. And then the ever popular foxglove or the digitalis species, many different species of this one as well. It is going to do a little bit better in some of the cooler, more temperate regions of the state. West Tennessee may have a little bit of trouble with this one. This is one that's going to kind of prefer shade, or at least some dappled shade, but just kind of be aware that it does prefer those cooler regions. So I didn't have that many in there, but we're going to talk about a few more as we move through. Perennials, this is going to be one of our biggest topic areas. And again, these are all in alphabetical order coming directly off these publications, but I wanted you to kind of be able to eyeball what these would look like. Of course, this one here is going to be the Aquila or the yarrow, depending on where you're from. Many colors in this as well. This one is also going to be termed one of those moonlight plants because that foliage can have that grayish silver color. This is one, if you are into companion planting, this one is going to draw in and be draw in the beneficial bugs and be a great habitat for those. So it's good to have some pockets of yarrow established throughout your garden area. This is the Agastache. This one here specifically is the Heather Queen. I popped this one in here because it's got that nice muted coral and purplish color. It's just a really nice contrast. This one here is going to need good drainage though, and it can be a short-lived plant, so maybe not putting it somewhere you want it to stay you know, forever. Just realize that's one that you're probably going to have to replace often. This is the Ajuga species. Oftentimes this will be utilized as a ground cover. It's a really low grower, the Ajuga reptans, or sometimes called bugleweed. If you have a shady area, of course this is in sunlight, but a shady area, it actually will prefer that. And it is going to be evergreen. This is the Amsonia, or what we refer to as blue star, often grown for its foliage because it looks kind of feathery, almost like a fern, asparagus fern type. But it's going to give great texture to any type border or any kind of rock garden. And it almost looks like phlox, the flowers do. And then in the fall, it's going to turn a really pretty coppery color. And then if you have really poor soil conditions, this one will thrive in those areas. The anemones, now this is not our native species that we're going to talk about next week. This is actually the Japanese cultivar or the hybrids from those. These can actually be pretty aggressive spreaders given the ideal conditions. One thing that's going to set this apart from some of our native species, and again you'll see those next week, but this is a little bit taller. It's not as short as some of our spring ephemeral varieties. And this one here is really popular, growing in popularity. This is our columbine. This is actually our native. This is a shade thriver. Got lots of beautiful foliage, and of course the bloom there just really makes it pop. And hummingbirds, of course, love that red color. This is one too that's going to be a short-lived plant in your garden, but it reseeds really profusely. So you kind of got to be careful with that because it can almost take over given the right situation. Here's another species that's going to thrive in the shade. I tried to put a little picture up here so you could kind of see what that flower cluster looks like. But the foliage just lends a nice contrast in any of your shade areas, woodland forests. But this is often referred to as spikenard, the Japanese spikenard. You'll hear me talk more about some of the spikenards later throughout the year, but this one here is specifically the Aurelia cordata. The cool thing about this too, it's going to have that yellowy chartreuse color. You can kind of see how that differs there in contrast to some of these bright glossy greens. It will completely disappear in the wintertime. It does die back completely to to the ground. And many folks will toss this into a shrub category as well. Kind of along with this one, the Artemisia. Again, many different species and cultivars, nice silver foliage. This is what we'll usually refer to as the wormwood. This one here is actually the silver mound. So it's going to be a little bit more of a low grower, a little bit more spready than some of the other. It is a great aromatic herb in the garden. And of course, humidity is going to cause it to kind of stretch a little bit and kind of, I don't want to say stun it back, but it just doesn't really like humidity all that way. It'll get kind of leggy, it gets sprawly. The aruncus, or the goat's beard, you can kind of see why it's called the goat beard there, but really cool little blooms. It's going to prefer shade. It doesn't like sunlight at all. This one here is actually called the Misty Lace cultivar. Again, it's going to thrive in some of those higher elevations across the state. But once you get this established, it's low maintenance. It doesn't require a lot of pruning. So nice little plant to have on hand. This is the Asarum splendens, or the Chinese wild ginger. Again, it's going to be a little bit different from some of our native species. And I'll compare those later in the year as we get to those points, but you can kind of see what that bloom looks like there. It is going to spread by rhizomes, and again, it's going to have that really pretty evergreen foliage, and is going to prefer to be in the shade. You can kind of see back here, this is some vinca, so I hope people get that out. It'll take over the universe. I digress. Oops. So this one here is another Asclepias. This is going to be a perennial milkweed, or what we refer to as the swamp milkweed. So you can see the butterflies just going crazy on that one. This one is actually the Cinderella cultivar, so you can kind of see what that bloom looks like in comparison to some of our other milkweeds. Aphids can be an issue with that, so just beware. This is the tuberosa cultivar, and again, the butterflies love it. This is one that you're going to see growing wild. If you're hiking in the woods or driving along gravelled forest roads, this is the one that you're more often to see out in the forest. I can't talk tonight, y'all. I'm telling you, that time change is killing me. Okay, so here's a really dainty blue flower that we see in the late summer, any of the asters, but this is pretty nice to see that pop of color late summer as everything's kind of died back if we get into a dry year. And then, of course, the steel bees make a really great border addition. They come in a multitude of colors. Amethyst, sentinel, those are going to be some of the more popular cultivars. But these are going to grow really nicely in shade, and they're still going to maintain that really bright pop of color. So, you know, a lot of times our shady plants don't really have that bright burst of color, but steel bees are going to perform really nice in those shady areas. They can even grow under walnut trees. So, you know, we don't want you planting your tomato gardens under there, but a steel bee doesn't care about that. This is one of my favorites. You probably heard me mention this. This is covered up at my house, but the Baptisia, or the false indigo. This is one that'll die back every year as well. It's just now starting to pop through, probably about a ½ inch out of the soil right now. So I'm getting pretty excited for this one. But you can even get some pink and white colors as well. As it continues to spread every year, you might eventually get to the point that you need to stake that as well. And you don't like have to use a hardscape or anything like that. You can kind of see how they've utilized other plants here. You can actually do that to kind of prop them up. And of course, the seed pods they add a really nice contrast in the fall, the big black seed pods. These are begonia species. A lot of times we're going to have these in the annuals, and there are annuals, but these here, we do have some species that will perform as a perennial. You're going to have the really pretty pink and white bloom. You can see that red contrast of the stem. But again, it's going to prefer heavy shade, and it's another one that's going to do well under walnut trees, and it's going to reseed itself very nicely. If you've never grown this one, this is the blackberry lily. It can be kind of finicky to get it going, but you can see what that fruit actually will look like. It's, again, a really cool plant to have in the landscape. It's one that you won't see blooming though until later in the summer, even into August. As far as the foliage, I didn't really put that on here, but it looks a lot like an iris. So it's going to kind of spread out and be predominant in the landscape, and that against rocks or even in borders. This is the butterfly bush, not to be confused with the milkweed. I know some folks will get those confused, but this is the butterfly bush. It's going to prefer sunshine. I put this one in here because there's so many different colors. The black knight, the blue chip, Miss Ruby, all of those really, really bright colors. So we're also going to often refer to this as a woody ornamental as well, but these are actually starting to be hybridized now for more of a compact and a less bushy growth, because that's one reason homeowners don't like those quite so well, because they can kind of take over the universe. But again, a great pollinator plant. This one here is what we refer to as plumbago. So the cool thing about this one is that that foliage is going to turn, and I should have done that, but I was on my mind was in the spring mission, but it's going to turn a really pretty red-orange color in the fall, and it's going to have these really cool, pretty blue dainty flowers in the spring. It will spread like a ground cover by those underground rhizomes and continually just kind of create a carpet. This one here is one of the coreopsis, the tick seed, as we'll often refer to it. And you notice the different colors there, many different colors and species now. So when you open up a Johnny's or any of those seed catalogs, you're just going to see a few pages of the tick seed now. So the cool thing about some of these newer varieties is that they're going to be longer bloomers, and you're not going to have to deadhead those. So if you have like the old variety of the tick seed, you know, you're always having to kind of give it a haircut throughout the season and keep it blooming. Some of those newer species, you're not going to have to do that with. This one here is the delphinium, or the larkspur. This is one that's going to have to be in full sunlight. I've heard lots of folks say this one is a finicky one to grow. I've never really tried to grow this one myself, so I'm not sure. But there is some of these, or there are some species that will reseed pretty prolifically. So again, make sure as you're reading up on these, if you like this kind of contrast, make sure you get one of those that will reseed. And again, we see the dianthus. You can notice that silvery foliage, another moonlight plant. You see that really light pink bloom. This is usually what we'll refer to as the cheddar pinks. So again, you're going to have really profuse blooms. That foliage is going to be more of a mounding rather than an upright. So if you've got areas you want to, you know, have the mounds, this is one that is really going to do well. Again, they thrive in those poor soil conditions. This is one of the dicentra species. So we're going to hit on these a lot more next week, some of our native species, but this is the fringed bleeding heart. Really nice foliage, beautiful blooms. This one here is actually the king of hearts. So if you like that contrast in color there, that's what that one is. It does like a really moist soil. So think about your woodland soils. And then same thing with the echinacea, so many different colors out there. I wanted to put something besides the usual in there, but this is some of those new hybrid cultivars that have been created. This is Powwow. I think I'll go back and make sure that I put that cultivar in here. I didn't list it on here, but bright, vivid red. Just remember that when it comes to some of these hybrids, they do have their pros and cons. So the echinacea hybrids are not going to be as well suited as some of our native species are. So just kind of keep that in mind. So this one here is one that we call barren wort. And remember, in Old English, wort just means herb or wort, depending on how you pronounce that. But this one is a really cool shade plant. It's got a really cool bloom, and the foliage is pretty unique because if you can see there, it's got that red fringe. And these don't like really bite, but they'll let you know that you're in their territory. So kind of a cool little species. This is another one of our euphorbia species. This one we refer to as spurge, more specifically the Tasmanian tiger. So again, less humid areas across the state or in the south is where this is going to perform a little bit best. And again, deer resistant. So any of those euphorbia species, make sure you check those out. This one here is our Joe Pye weed, and you notice that it's kind of changed its Latin name in the last several years. There are many new species that have come about. If you grow Joe Pye, or if you know Joe Pye, you can probably tell here this is one of the hybrids. It's a little bit lighter in color, so you can kind of run the whole gamut, the whole spectrum of the blues and purples with these. So butterflies, as you can see there, are going to love Joe Pye weed. It's one that's going to bloom late summer. It does prefer really moist areas, so if you've got like a moist swampy area, they'll perform quite nicely there, along with goldenrod and ironweed. Excuse me. This is Gaillardia, or what we call blanket flower. This is the Mesa series, so you probably noticed a little bit brighter in color. So again, some of these new hybrids have come along as far as that bright pop. This is one that's going to reseed very nicely as well. This is here is called the wand flower. You can kind of tell it does look like a wand. It almost looks like a grass with those prolific blooms attached that look like stars. This is one of our sunflower species. This is the oxeye sunflower. Notice the foliage there. That's one reason I put it in there, so it adds a nice little contrast as well. And of course the flower is much smaller, almost looks like a rudbeckia. The hellebores, or the Lenten rose, these are blooming now. If you have these in your landscape, they'll come in this pink color or even that chartreuse color. So, this is one that you will hear about next week when we talk about Easter plants. But it does have that nice evergreen foliage throughout the winter months. And it will naturalize to an area, and it recedes very nicely. This is one of the species of coral bells, or the euchera. Many folks will grow these because they are a shade-loving plant, but then also because such a contrast of colors. The foliage ranges from all kinds of different colors, from the bronze to the apricot color, the chartreuse, the gold, the red, the mahogany. So many different species of this that are available. I think this one here is actually the caramel. So this is a hibiscus, or the rose mallow. So this is one that we're going to see blooming all the way up until October. You can get a white species of this as well, so it makes a nice contrast in the late summer months, just that white color. It does like wet soil, so keep that in mind as well. This is one we'll be seeing before too long, the Iris cristata, or the crested iris. This is one that naturalizes really nicely as well, prefers shady areas. This is going to be one of our native woodland species. This is our Shasta daisy. This one particularly is the Becky cultivar. It throws off many, many blooms. You can probably see the pods throughout there. So it's very, very prolific bloomer throughout the season. And then this is one that you can actually divide and share with your neighbor quite easily without disrupting the plant. And then the Liatris, I threw this one in here because of the different colors, just to show how nice it does perform in a border type setting. Gives you a little bit of a contrast too, along with a little bit of texture. This one here is the cobalt species. It does like a well-drained soil though, so again, make sure when you're doing site selection that you're pairing these perennials with the right site conditions. That one also dries very nicely. This is what we refer to as creeping Jenny. It's going to be an evergreen. You can see those dainty yellow flowers there. Also that chartreuse color makes a nice setting in a rock garden. This one here is going to, the foliage is going to turn like a bronze caramel color in the fall. So that's another reason folks like that. It almost acts like a ground cover. It does spread though. The Monardas, many different colors of this one as well, the bee balms. This is one that'll bloom throughout the season, but you want to kind of keep those different cultivars and species from intermingling too much because they can affect the blooms. So make sure that you're kind of keeping them, you don't have to like separate them, but just kind of keep those thinned out so it doesn't affect your bloom time. And this is one that it'll do okay in full sun and part shade, but if you have it in the shade full time, of course that color is going to be a little bit lighter, but then it's also going to be prone to the mildews. So if that's an issue, there are going to be cultivars that are better suited or resistant to some of those mildews of the summertime months. The oxalis or the ground sorrel. This is one, St. Patty's Day coming up in a couple of days. You kind of looks like the clover, but this is one that's going to grow in the shade, very low maintenance plant, but once it gets established, it can be hard to get rid of. So just keep that in mind too. These are our peonies, or pineys, depending on where you're from. So these are going to be really nice in the shade, and of course, many different colors of these as well. These are going to be deer resistant as well. And just remember when you plant these to not plant them too deep. These are going to be kind of shallow rooters. So I'll just throw that out there because I have questions on that from time to time. This is the pin stamens, or what we'll refer to as beard tongue. So actually 2 pictures here, so you can kind of see how that blooms up the stalk and then what that flower looks like. This one here is actually the Husker's Red, and it is going to be native and drought tolerant. And usually those words are going to be kind of synonymous. Usually when we talk about native species, they are going to be a little bit more tolerant of drought conditions. This is one of the sages. This one is the Russian sage. It's going to prefer that full sun, but you can see those dainty little bluish, purplish flower stalks. So you can kind of see how that's intermingled. Lots of contrast there. Very low maintenance plant. And of course the phlox, this is the woodland phlox. This is not the low grower, so this is going to be that native species, but the bloom time is really short on this one, y'all. So you get that really bright, vivid pop of color, but then it just kind of dissipates and it's gone. But this one here is the blue moon species. This is what we refer to as the obedient plant. You notice I'm not saying the Latin on some of these, right? Kind of hard to say there. I'll just get all tongue warbled up. But notice that this is a Virginiana, so it is going to be a native species as well. This is one that's going to bloom all the way up until frost, and you can see there are a couple of different colors. This one is Miss Manners and Pink Manners, just as an FYI. Again, a deer-resistant plant. If you have a really poor soil site like heavy clay, this is one that actually kind of likes that heavy clay and can actually help bust some of that up because it actually spreads via those roots. The polygonatums, this is actually the true Solomon seal, one that's going to grow really nicely in the shade, and it is going to tolerate really poor and wet soils. And then we also have false Solomon seal, but we'll talk about that one next week. The pulmonaria, here you can kind of see that speckled leaf and the different hues of that blue, and then of course the bud there with that kind of that burgundy russet color. But this is another one of those wort plants. This is lungwort, so it is going to prefer the shady areas. Again, deer resistant. Here's one of the Rudbeckia species. You can kind of see how that bloom tapers down, so you can get kind of depends on which bloom you prefer, but this is the true Rudbeckia species here. It is going to reseed. It's going to multiply in clumps. This one here is actually the Goldstrom species. This is the Mexican petunia. And notice I didn't have petunia in the annuals, but I figure everybody knows what petunias are. But they are really bad to get powdery and downy mildew, so be aware of that. But this is the Mexican petunia, upright petunia. I don't really know of a lot of folks in Northeast Tennessee that have had success growing this. Not to say that they that it won't. I've just not heard good successes with that. But this is one that's going to spread pretty prolifically by rhizomes. So think about Bermuda grass. That's how Bermuda grows. But it will naturalize. So be kind of conscious of that. Another one of our salvias, this is the Mexican bush sage. That picture is kind of bad, but this is one that has that really velvety texture in the silver foliage. So again, nice contrast with the pineapple sage. This one here is actually Santa Barbara. Another salvia, this is what we call bog sage. So if you're more into like the Carolina blue color, you can kind of see that intermingling there with some various colors. So it makes a really nice contrast. It is probably more aggressive than some of the other salvia, so be aware of that. This is a Santolina, or one that we call lavender cotton, and of course not for the color of the bloom, but you can kind of see there another one of those moonlight plants with that silvery purplish gray foliage. It is going to be an evergreen, and you can see that it can spread really nicely and fill in a corner. This one is actually banana species, and it does have a really nice scent as well. This is one of the sedums, probably more often referred to as stonecrop. You can kind of see there, it almost looks like it's growing in the rocks. I actually have some of this growing on my rocks where a little bit of soil has nestled in the cracks and the crevices, and you can kind of see how that kind of takes over. Gives it a really nice burst of color and kind of frames in some of those rocks. And I mentioned the goldenrod a little bit earlier, so again, makes a really nice addition with Joe Pye and the ironweed. Remember, this is not the one that gives everybody ragweed. That's the true ragweed, but this one gets blamed. But really pretty on the roadside. This is actually the autumn, no, golden baby. That's what this one is. So a little bit shorter in stature than our native species. The Spigelia, or Indian pinks. Again, hummingbirds love anything that has that bright red color, so you can see they would really be attracted to this. This is also going to be a native plant, and it's going to, as it blooms out, it's going to, you can kind of see this starting to take place, that yellow throat, and you'll start to see more of that yellow contrast. This is what we call betony. So this is one that's really prolific in the Smokies, wood betony. Many different species of that again, but you can kind of see what that foliage looks like, frames in for a nice border area. It is going to prefer dappled shade though. This is in the same family as lamb's ear. So if you have lamb's ear, it's going to grow very similarly to that. We've seen the asters already. This is actually the aromatic asters, and they do actually have a really nice scent to those. They're going to bloom a little bit later than our native asters, and they're going to have that really nice contrast to that yellow center. This one here is actually October skies. Many species of the tiarella, or the foam flower, again, a shade species, as you can see here from this setting, but they'll eventually kind of grow together and form a colony that'll be very prolific. And there are some different cultivars of this. You can kind of tell the white with the pink tip, that's going to be sugar and spice. This is spiderwort. This is one that's going to bloom really profusely, starting probably in about another month and go through the summer months into July. It almost looks like a grass, but then it throws off these really cool looking little flowers. And you can get it, you can see the dark purple or even the light blue. It's going to prefer a wet site. This is the Trillium grandiflorum. We're going to talk a little bit more about trilliums next week, but the cool thing about this, you can start to see some of those blooms. They pop out really pretty white, but then as they start fading, they turn that pinkish color. So nice contrast there. Here's the perennial verbena. This is the, I think this is the homestead species here, but it is going to clump and kind of spread together. And then the Veronia, or the slim leaf ironweed, it looks a little bit different if you're familiar with the true ironweed. This one is much shorter in stature, and the bloom is nowhere near quite as large as the ironweed. So almost like a dwarf ironweed, but this is one that's going to bloom later in the summer. And then Veronica, this is our speedwell. We're seeing this like crazy right now. A lot of people consider this a weed, but it makes a really pretty ground cover, especially this time of year. Mine has been blooming for a couple of weeks now, so it's kind of nice to see that pop of blue in the springtime. All right, so now we're going to move into bulbs, and all the bulbs we're going to talk about are actually ones that we can plant now in the spring and enjoy those throughout the summer months. So we'll talk about bulbs that we plant for color this time of year later on in the year. But this one here is the Lily of the Nile. That one's kind of blurry too. I'm not sure what's happening here. But you can kind of see how those flowers all come together at the top of this stem. It makes a very showy border, or kind of like even a hedgerow here. But this will bloom in the summertime. You can plant it in the spring. Many folks will plant it in a container. It does quite nicely in there. There are different hardiness levels, so just make sure you check into that before purchasing. The elephant ears, this is the upright elephant ear. It is going to be a shade lover because it is going to be tropical in nature, but this is one that we can plant in the spring. In the fall, we'd want to dig that up and store it until springtime. This is the arum. This is the pictum species, so it is going to prefer shade. It's got some really cool foliage that you can see there in the winter months, and then it's going to have that red fruit throughout the summertime. It tolerates heavy shade and wet soil. I keep thinking I hit that button to turn my phone off, y'all, and it just keeps dinging. Let me just, there we go. The thing about this, as pretty as a plant it is and very unique and has a lot of contrast, it can be rather aggressive, and some would consider it invasive. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind. These are the caladiums. This is a beautiful plant for just the foliage interest. Many different colors available on the market. Even different sizes. You can get the dwarf, or even more upright, more prostrate, more spready, but they're all typically pretty sun-loving plants. Again, kind of tropical in nature. Don't plant these too early. The soil's got to be warm enough. So think about planting green beans. That would be about the time you want to plant these. Nothing before, or it can stunt their growth back. This is crinum or crenum, pink flamingo. So many different names that this one can go by. There may even be more than that, but many different hybrids. You can kind of see what that foliage looks like. It's going to have that really dark pink bud, and then those flowers are really, really fragrant. This one is the Crosscosmia, so it's going to require a really nice, well-drained site, and it's going to multiply pretty quickly. So this is one you'll be dividing pretty frequently. Many species of dahlias, but we couldn't do a presentation without mentioning those. There's even a Dahlia Society, I'm not sure what it's called, but something Dahlia Society in Tennessee. So for more information on dahlias, that's a really good resource to have. This is the eucamas, or the pineapple lily. You can probably tell by looking at that, it looks like a pineapple. Different colors that we can get in there as well. And then gladiolas. Many home gardeners have gotten away from some of these because they're so leggy and you're having to stake those up or tie those up all the time. But there are many, many different colors available now. They used to come in just the standard, you know, red and yellow and white. But if you can kind of intermingle those where you've got other plants that are kind of serving as that backdrop or the staking mechanism, these add a really nice pop of color. Easy to take care of. This is the butterfly ginger lily. This is one that you would refer to as a pass-along plant, often given to new people moving into the neighborhood or whatever. It's got a very nice, fragrant white flower. This one spreads pretty quickly, and this is one that would require cover of mulch in the winter months. This is the Asiatic lily. It's going to bloom in many different colors, but again, it's one of those that you can't mention bulbs without talking about the Asiatic lilies. Of course, they're going to be the first lilies to bloom in the season. This is the Formosa lily. You can see the pollen dripping off of that one right there, but it's going to reseed itself pretty nicely, and it's a pretty reliable bloomer. And then, of course, the tiger lily. It's an old-timey favorite, another one of those pass-along plants. You'll often see these even old home sites in the national forest or the national parks, kind of along with daffodils and phacelia. You'll often see these on those old homesteads. Lycoris, or the spider lily, or sometimes referred to as the hurricane lily. This is one that's going to do really nicely in the shade. This is one that won't bloom though till way up later into the summer months. And this one here, also another Lycoris species, but this is the naked ladies. I'll have a lot of phone calls on these each year wanting to know what those bare-stemmed lily-looking plants are growing out there in the field. So these are the naked ladies. They are going to perform better in the shade. Just kind of cool because they don't have a lot of foliage. And this one is referred to as the rain lily, and the reason for that, it kind of looks like a lotus. It will catch the rain. So it's one of those survival type plants. If you're ever out in the woods and you get stuck without water, it's one that kind of holds a water reserve in those pockets. And it will naturalize, so it can be very vigorous once it gets established. Calla lilies, always very popular. They're going to do better in part sun and shade. They don't really like the heat of summer. The color starts to fade a little bit, but oftentimes they'll start reblooming again in the fall, and they do prefer a moist site. And then this is the canna lily. I put those in here back to back because I am always getting them confused. You would think after this many years doing this that I would, but I always kind of have to calla canna. But the calla or the canna lily here, lots of different species. It is going to be a little bit more tropical in nature. It's going to tolerate those wet soils. Diseases can affect the canna lilies a little bit more than the calla. All right, so just to mention a few vines, of course, clematis. So many species out there. I can't remember what this one is right off the top of my head. I'll have to go back and put that one in there. But there is one called Sweet Autumn, and it's got really big, huge white blooms, and it's a very aggressive grower. So if you're wanting to get a clematis started, that might be one to investigate to get you growing. This is one of the ipomoeas. This is the moon vine or the moon flower. It is pretty aggressive once it gets established, but it only blooms at night. It will require some kind of trellis or support, and you can kind of see what this is growing on. So it doesn't require a lot, but you are going to have to do something, but it will reseed itself. In that same family, we have the cardinal climber. You'll often see this blooming. Hummingbirds love this. You can't really see that foliage very good, but it's got a really lacy foliage, but it's not going to be quite as fine as the cypress vine. And I'll show you that one here in just a minute. And it does reseed itself. This is the black-eyed Susan vine, Thunbergia. It prefers a well-drained soil, but again, you're going to have to do something to support the vine. This is the cypress vine, so it's going to be very similar to the cardinal vine. You can kind of see what that foliage looks like, and it does have those trumpet kind of bell-shaped blooms. Hummingbirds love it. It can be a weed or become a weed, so be careful with that. And then this one here is the sweet pea. This is not usually the ones that we see growing on the roadside. Those are going to be more of a light pinkish purple color, but this is just to show you that there's many different colors available. So really nice contrast here. This is one that it's okay to have that support, but it's not gonna be as required as some of the other ones that I just showed you. So oftentimes other plants, as long as you intermingle it, will serve as that support. All right, so our seed grown flowers, and many that we've already talked about you can grow easily from seed, but some of these next few are ones that we can actually start from seed here in the next month or so, and they'll perform very nicely. Some are going to be annual, biennial, perennial. Just make sure that you refer back to that publication. But hollyhocks, very popular in our region, great pollinator plants. They're going to be a biennial, but with the hollyhocks, oftentimes we'll have that rust disease. And I should have put a picture in here to show y'all that, but it'll start at the base of that plant and just move up and just speckle those leaves, and oftentimes you won't even get flowers as a result. So you kind of got to be keep a watchful eye out for the rust. Kind of cut that off at the head. Here's a really cool plant, the amaranthus, or more specific, love lies bleeding. You can kind of tell there why it gets that name. So it's going to have those trailing clusters of red and yellow or green. It is going to be very drought tolerant, and it's going to reseed pretty prolifically. Here's another amaranth species. This one here is called hot biscuits. No, this is not hot biscuits. This is the Hopi red dye. I'm sorry. And it's going to be a little bit more upright, and even the foliage is going to be that reddish burgundy color. This is the false Queen Anne's lace. It doesn't look very different from the true Queen Anne's lace. Sometimes you'll actually call it false bishop's weed. But either way, it's going to be very similar, although they are in a different family. They are going to attract pollinators. This is one that's going to do best when you actually direct sow it into the ground anyway, and then it'll start reseeding and establishing its own territory. This is a celosia species, again, often referred to as garden wheat, so that looks a little bit different from the one I showed you there before. And then this one is the coxcombs. Again, any of those celosia species like the dry weather. This is the cornflower, or the bachelor button. So it's going to be one of those cool season annuals, very drought tolerant, poor soil. Cosmos, probably many gardeners are growing these, very prolific bloomers in the summertime, make excellent additions to like a garden border. And then this is the true Queen Anne's lace. So one of the biggest differences there is it's going to be more flat top. And this is the one that we see growing prolifically in our margins, roadsides. This is going to be that native species. This one is also going to be the host for the swallowtail caterpillar. This is our Echinacea tennescensis. So this is one that's common to the cedar glades in Middle Tennessee. You can probably tell there that the petals are a lot more narrower than what our true coneflower would be, but this is our native perennial coneflower in Tennessee. Some of the helianthus or sunflower species, this is the angustifolia here particularly, or sometimes referred to as the swamp sunflower. It is a perennial. It's going to bloom later in the summer on into fall, much like all of our sunflowers, but they're going to eventually naturalize and form a really nice colony. So this is one that you'll often see in the interstate medians as well. If you're growing wildflower plots for wildlife, this is an excellent one to include in that. The limonium or status, if you're doing dried flower arrangements, this is a beautiful one. But this is one that will not tolerate wet soils at all. It's got to have a really well-drained site. Lunaria or money plant. This is one that I have growing pretty prolifically. It's the one that puts off the little seed pods that look like coins later in the fall. But this will be one of the first things blooming here in another week or so. But it is a biennial, so it's going to throw off a lot of foliage that first year. Many people will think it's a weed and pull it, but you can kind of see what these look like. So oftentimes you'll need to thin those out, but really easy to grow and get started. This is the rose campion. It almost looks like some of the pinks, but that foliage and the flower are a little bit different, but from a distance, they're going to look very similar. This would be considered a short-lived perennial. Many would consider it a biennial. So kind of keep that in mind. The blooms are going to be this color or in white. This is the mirabilis or the 4 o'clocks. These can be rather invasive. They're a really nice addition to the landscape, but you kind of got to keep those plucked out because they are very vigorous reseeders. This is the Nigella, or what we refer to as love in a mist. Pretty cool little plant. Almost looks like a passion flower, but nice contrast with that foliage there. And this is the true opium poppy. Comes in different colors. Some of the old-fashioned poppies are going to require staking. They're going to have more of a dense, full flower bloom. I should have put a picture in here. But again, different species of this one. Different, you can kind of see the different patterns too. Some will be solid color. Some will have like a diamond shape on the interior. You can kind of see some of those colors there. This is the Chinese lantern. Almost, if you just glance at it, looks like a habanero pepper, but a pretty cool little plant that dries very nicely too for cut flower arrangements. So that skin is very thin, very papery, but it does reseed itself. This one here is what we call the jewels of opal, the Telenium species. So you can kind of see what that flower looks like up close, but it almost looks like the eucharis or the coral bells, the way it's got that dainty foliage and then these large spikes of flowers, or the jewels. This one here is the Terenia. Pretty cool looking little flower. Almost looks like a pansy, but it's going to act a lot different. But it is going to reseed itself, and then you can also get some variation in your foliage with these as well. All right, I wanted to mention a few grasses. These are going to be sweet flag. You've heard me mention this. The Native Americans love this plant. It was actually what they utilized to sweeten things back in the day. It's one that actually will bloom in the water, so it's kind of cool there too. But if you have a pond or anything like that, a stream, it's going to do really nicely on those stream banks. This one here is the Carex species, many different species of the Japanese sedge grass, but it can be very prolific as a spreader. It kind of looks like grass, but it's going to get a little bit taller. This is the larapi. This one here is the muscari, but do not get this confused with gray hyacinths because that's also a muscari, but this is actually the larapi muscari. Usually used as a border plant. This one here is often referred to as ribbon grass. Kind of see how they've utilized that there in the landscape. And then of course our switchgrass. This is what, as it's first starts growing in the summer, this is what it's going to look like, a bright burst of green color, and then it's going to, we've got red species that'll actually be red tipped and turn that bronzy color in the fall. This one is the feathery grass. So this is one that we can actually utilize as a screen. It's going to get really tall, so it can serve as a great border. And then this one is giving you that bright color of blue. You can kind of see how that's intermingled there. I'm not going to try to say that word, but it's in your publication. If you're more into the red color, then this is going to be a great one to choose, the Imperator. And it's going to be that color all year long. And then this is our big blue stem, which is also a native, but it's going to be shorter in stature than the switchgrass. And if you have a dry site, if you have a sloping area, you can kind of see that here. It's going to perform very nicely. Can really serve as an erosion control on some of those steep slopes. And then this one here is the miscanthus. I wanted you to see that plume. It's also going to be one of those that's going to serve great in a sloping condition as well. All right, so that's going to wind us up. I didn't go into trees and shrubs because I'm hoping that y'all looked at those tree publications from last week. Hang on, let me shut this down so I can see y'all. But anyway, I've got some publications that I'm going to send you in a bulk email tonight. And they're going to have the bulbs, the annuals, perennials, biennials, all those kind of lumped together. But then I'm also going to give you the link to the website. So on that Monday Musings portal, on the landscape page, all of those are going to be listed together. So they're going to be there for quick reference anytime you want to go and look at those along with tonight's presentation. And they should be in the same order. So if like you're looking for grass, you know, to kind of scroll to the bottom. The tree publications are there too. And then I think a lot of these publications are on both the Sustainable Landscapes page and just the landscape page. So you're not having to go to one side or the other. They're going to be kind of duplicitous on the same site to make it easy for you. You can still be utilizing that Google Drive. I've already put all those in there, even tonight's presentation, and I noticed some spelling mistakes, so I'm going to go back and change that. So if you see it disappear, that's why. And I'm going to change that up. Make sure that next week, you know, or come back, that we're going to do the Easter tradition, traditional plants, you know, the symbolism behind that, kind of how we did at Thanksgiving and at Christmas. So just go into the basics of Easter flowers and then move out on the trail and kind of talk about some of the symbolism from some of those spring ephemerals that we're starting to see. I'll check the chat box and see what we've got in there question wise and get a copy of that to y'all too. And other than that, I think we're finished for tonight. That was kind of quick, but I wanted to hopefully spur a little interest in getting some of these. And Barbara, I saw your question on hollies. We're going to talk about some of those shrubs, and there is a publication about that in there too. So don't hesitate as we get into the growing season to reach out to us and ask anything. We'll, if I don't know it, Darby don't know it, we'll find one of our colleagues that does and see how to help you out. So with that, we'll log off, and I will see y'all next Monday night at 6:30. Thanks, guys.